Welcome to day 8 of the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology, Season 2. We've been working our way slowly but surely through the labyrinth. That is the story of how Culhwch won Olwen. Today's presentation is going to be a bit shorter, so before I start, I want to catch up on some of the discussion from the comments section. I asked people how they honestly felt about the court list a few days back. My favorite comment was the person who said, "It's a hideous intrusion into the story," end quotes. Then in the next sentence, they said how fun it was to go down all the rabbit holes looking these people up. I thought that was great. I think that kind of sums up the range of responses in that one response. I'm pleased that so many people were up for exploring it, and I do totally understand if you remain unimpressed. The question about giants also brought out some long and interesting answers. A lot of people seem to agree with me more or less that giants kind of represent primeval beings or ancestors. One person suggested that language is an impediment to understanding giants in Welsh culture. I certainly agree that language can be an impediment to cultural understanding of many things. I'm not sure that Gower is all that nuanced, though. This person went on to say that giants aren't a separate race for the Welsh and that they're seen as intermarrying with the nobility. I suspect that what we really have is a situation where every generation says, once there were giants. See, there's even one in my family tree. So while they're seen as ancestors, no one is really looking for a giant to mate with. I really appreciated the time that person took to write that, so I hope they don't mind me having a different point of view. Another person mentioned Arthur is both a slayer of giants and related to them. Maybe it's a kind of like killing off the old order without completely rejecting it. While someone else wondered if they're a symbol of masculinity run amok. I don't know. If you've been following the series, then you know that so far, a lot of the story has been taken up with listing things. We had 2 days of story, and then we had 3 days of list, and then another 2 days of story, and now we've hit another list. And this one is called the Anoethau. You can see that word written down in a minute. Anoeth means a wonder or a feat or something difficult to obtain. Anoethau is just the plural. In English, we often refer to this section of the story as the tasks, but Anoethau is a much better word. It gives more of a sense of the magic of things that have to be done and the things that have to be obtained. The medieval period was rife with lists of wondrous and miraculous things. And that's probably another thing we need to consider with the lists in Culhwch. The educated classes loved this stuff. Maybe I'm a bit of a hoarder myself, because I find it difficult to prioritize the Anoethau and decide which ones to keep in when I'm telling the story and which ones to leave out. Since you've been telling me that all the Welsh names make things difficult to follow, I did something which I hope you find helpful. It helped me. I made a chart which helped me see the relationships between the tasks more clearly. So I'm quite proud of my wee chart. So now I'm going to inflict it on you. I hope that it helps you and that a bit of this will stick with you. So the next time you encounter this part of the story, a lot of things will feel familiar. I actually covered the first 7 tasks yesterday, but there's more than 30 left to go. So rather than go crazy trying to tell them and be really entertaining, which I'd probably fail at without a lot of rehearsal, I'm just going to calmly take you through them. So here's the chart. I know it's a bit small to read, but I'll zoom in a moment. Before I do, we'll just get a bird's eye view. So here's the word Anoethau, but you'll see it more close up soon. The tasks start with the things needed for the wedding feast. So this clump of things here. In the upper left is the food and drink. And then to the right of that is some serving vessels. And just below that, some musical entertainment. And then we come to Ysbyddaden's personal grooming needs. A few things to shave his tough old beard, and then the biggest category, which is the things needed to cut and style his hair, all this stuff down here. So these agricultural jobs are the ones I told you yesterday. The clearing and sowing of the thicket reminds me a bit of the many times in Irish lore some ancestor figure clears land for agriculture. 2 and 3, a Mython, son of the goddess Dawn, is rarely mentioned in Welsh texts, but he's assumed to be a god of the plough, maybe a bit like the Irish Macecht. And Govanon, son of Dawn, is cognate with the early Celtic Gobanos. Gobanos was known in Gaul, I think, but also in Wales. Abergavenny comes from his name. Then there are 3 pairs of oxen, and these all belong to specific people who are named and so on. And finally, this business with digging up the flax seed and replanting it. I can't see that being easy, and we'll learn later in the story how they do it. And that's the thing. Yeah, this is a list, but how these things are achieved are a big part of the rest of the story. However, hazard warning, there are a number of inconsistencies, tasks that are never mentioned again, and a few things that happen that weren't mentioned in the Anoithai. You just have to roll with that. The other food items are honey to make braggot. Braggot is a kind of cross between mead and ale, and the hamper of Gwyddno Garan here. So you might remember that we met Gwyddno when we talked about Gwyn ap Nudd. He was the one who met Gwyn and had the conversation with him about visiting battlefields and all that. So Gwyddno was a king whose kingdom was in low-lying coastal land, and it was inundated by the sea when a dike that protected it gave away. Of course, this is a legend. There's some reason to believe that once something like that did happen in Wales, but probably not in the time that we think Gwyddno is supposed to have lived. It's amusing that his second name, which I haven't written here, is Garanhir, which means long shanks, as if he was obliged to wade like a heron. Now, Gwyddno is also the father of Elfyn, the prince who discovers the infant Taliesin in the fish weir in that story, which you may know. And he's also said to possess a hamper. That's Gwyddno, not Elfyn. Gwyddno is supposed to possess a hamper, which produces an endless supply of food. Ysbyddaden is hoping to use some of that food for the wedding feast. So there are also these serving vessels, a cup, a drinking horn, and some special bottles for keeping milk cold. And then Diurnach's cauldron. We'll come to that in a day or two. For music at the feast, Tyarchi's harp, which can play by itself, probably saves on paying the musicians, and the birds of Rhiannon. Ysbyddaden describes these as they that can wake the dead and lull the living to sleep. The birds of Rhiannon seem to have soothing and cathartic properties, maybe even a psychopompic function to guide the dead. The other place we meet them is in the second branch of the Mabinogi, where they appear as a sort of feast for the dead. Bendigeidfran, also a giant, of course, is the person in that feast. We have to keep in mind that Ysbyddaden is preparing not only for his daughter's wedding feast here, but also his own wake. Perhaps he thinks he'll need a bit of lulling and soothing. Now, in order to look his best for the wedding, Ysbyddaden needs a good tidy up, a bit of a makeover. So this is where I think his name Hawthorne or Thorny comes into play. His beard is so terribly tough that there's only one thing that will cut it, the tusk of the boar Ysgithrin. He isn't the main boar in our story, he's just a kind of warm-up act. But interestingly, he's described as Pen Baith, chief of boars. The Turk Truth, who we'll meet soon, is referred to as the king of boars in Irish literature. Ysgithrin's tusk must be pulled out while the boar is alive. Otherwise, its shaving properties will be ruined. So this presents an interesting problem, but the Irishman Odger, son of Aidh, is just the man to do it. But Cow Prydain, he's called, Cow Prydain, presumably a Pict from Scotland, is required to carry the tusk once Odger pulls it out. Now, I've just written witch's blood here, but this is a very particular witch's blood, and it's required to soften Ysbyddaden's stubble so he can finally get a proper shave. This must be the blood of the very black witch, daughter of the very white witch who dwells in the uplands of hell. Yikes. It's important that this distinctive grooming product is kept warm or it won't work. Fortunately, Gwyddlwn Gore has the perfect bottles for this, some kind of medieval thermos flasks. And it's at this point that Ysbyddaden suddenly thinks, oh, heck, we'll need bottles for keeping milk cold at the feast too. Some of the guests will surely fancy a glass of milk. So he tells Culhwch to pick up some other special bottles from Hryn Rhy Barfog while he's at it. These bottles keep the milk cold. So that's the shaving dealt with. Now the haircut. So Ysbyddaden's hair is in a right state. He's going to need either heavy-duty cutting equipment or, better yet, a magical comb and shears. The ones he needs are lodged in the bristles between the ears of a huge boar called Tuairc Truith. And this is where everything explodes. In order to hunt Tuairc Truith, they need a dog called Dridwan, a special hunting hound. Dridwan needs a lot of special equipment to control him. One person has the necessary leash, and another person has the collar, and a third has the chain. And that's all very well, but even with all that, who's going to hold the other end? Only one man can handle Dridwan, we're told, Mabon ap Modron. We'll talk about Mabon in great depth another day. Right now, what you need to know is that Mabon went missing in infancy, a bit like Pryderi in the first branch. And that was a really long time ago, and nobody has seen or heard of him since. Now, his cousin Eidoil might know where he is, and he'll be very keen to find him because he's his long-lost cousin. So it will probably be important to look for Eidoil first. On the off chance that they do find Mabon, he's going to need a special horse, Gwyn Mungdduin, white or gray brown mane. Sounds like a pretty horse. Mabon isn't the only huntsman needed, however. We've got Garcelydd Wyddel. He's described as the chief huntsman of Ireland. And Cenedir Wyllt, he's being called to handle the two unnamed dogs, these two dogs here. Wyllt means wild, and he's described as wilder than the wildest beast. Then we have Gwyn ap Nudd. Now we know him, and he'll need a black horse called Dee. And then Gwilhennin, the king of France, is a good hunter apparently, and he'll be needed to help. And Alan Dyfed is here. He's called the Unleasher. In some circles, he'd be called a slipper, I think, these days. The guy who knows exactly how and when to release the hunting dogs for maximum effect. So these two dogs here, Aned and Aithlem, they may be the two dogs mentioned further up. It's not clear. And when they're actually collecting hunting dogs in the story, there's another pair, the whelps of Graid, son of Eri. They're not on this list, but they're in the court list, and they're in the story later. Whoever these two dogs are, they need a special leash made out of the beard hairs of Dithas Varvog. Like Ysgithran's tusk, these have to be plucked out while Dithas is alive, poor guy. So that leaves Arthur and his huntsman to help with the hunt. And these three down here, Bwlch, Cefwlch, and Sifwlch. whose vast family all have names that rhyme. There's just one more thing: the sword of Urnach, the giant. Now, that's a story for tomorrow. So I hope this might have tamed this section of the story for you a bit, so that when you come to read it next time, or you hear a storyteller in full flight with it, you'll be able to pick up on a lot of familiar things, and it'll help the rest of the story make sense in the coming days. It's said that when stories like this were told in royal courts, the bards and better educated nobles enjoyed this kind of thing because they knew what it meant and could nod knowingly in all the right places. So that's kind of where we're trying to get you to. So that brings us to today's challenge question. Who or what on this list do you find most interesting, and why? So please be specific. Tomorrow we'll get back to our story once again, and I do believe it's going to be time to meet another giant. So I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. If you're enjoying this series, why not take one of my online classes? There's almost always something on offer. Some classes have tiered pay-what-you-can pricing, and there are usually a few scholarships available for the more expensive classes. To get notifications about classes and about scholarships when they're announced, you can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter, or follow me on my Patreon page.